Hello, you're watching Context Special. I'm Orkan Amishov here to ask relevant and pertinent questions in pursuit of eliminating and elucidating answers. And the central question now, amongst many other principal issues that will dominate this week's 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly, is a peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine, or, in other words, the preservation of the ideological vitality of the two-state solution, even though many in Israel and beyond see it as having not the remotest prospect of implementation. With a growing number of countries recognizing the state of Palestine, Britain's decision stands out for its historic weight and its potential implications. UK's recognition is not happening in isolation. On the 22nd of September, France and Saudi Arabia convened a joint summit in New York City to rally support for the two-state solution, underscoring that the debate at this year's General Assembly has a very clear focal point. In some ways, the tide is turning in favor of the Palestinian cause. But will this shift change anything on the ground? Will it help Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, or make the creation of an actual state, still only conjectural, more likely? To give context to the British position in particular, we must recall its attitude towards the creation of the State of Israel. Britain's role in the creation of Israel has always been marked by a certain degree of ambivalence. In 1917, with the Balfour Declaration, it acted as a midwife to the Jewish national home, whilst pledging not to prejudice the civic and religious rights of Palestine's non-Jewish or Arab communities. By 1948, however, exhausted by war and unable to reconcile conflicting promises, Britain stepped aside. The midwife became a bystander, leaving the United States and the Soviet Union to recognize Israel at its birth. Since then, London has tried to walk a line between Arab and Israeli claims, often accused of favoring neither and frustrating both. Now, with the recognition of Palestinian state in 2025, Britain is, in view of many, in effect confronting that long history, seeking to redeem the unfulfilled half of the Balfour's pledge: midwife, bystander, and now balancer. Britain faces past even as it tries to shape its present. As Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer declared when announcing Britain's recognition of the State of Palestine, this step is necessary to revive the hope of peace and a two-state solution. The Prime Minister reminded that Britain had recognized the State of Palestine, State of Israel, more than 75 years ago as a homeland of the Jewish people, and added that by now joining over 150 countries in recognizing the State of Palestine, Britain is pledging to both Palestinians and Israelis that a better future is indeed possible. Of course, it's an event of some magnitude, symbolically very powerful, legally, some would say significant too, and politically, no doubt, very contentious. And it is within this framework that we ask, how important is Britain's decision? What are the wide implications for the two-state solution? And how does this recognition connect to Britain's historic role as midwife, bystander, and now perhaps balancer in this very conflict? And fundamentally, more than anything else, what is next for Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank? Joining me now, Andy Preston, political broadcaster from North Yorkshire, and Ken van Leeuwen, political expert, who's joining us from Amsterdam. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen.
Hi.
Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us today, and sorry for this long introduction. Andy, my first question is to you. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer spoke extensively about Britain's historic responsibility of the unfulfilled promise made back in 1917. Do you see this symbolic but formal recognition as largely about that sense of duty, or is it rather a reaction to what Israel has been doing in relation to Gaza over the past couple of years? And given Britain's role in the Balfour Declaration, its imperial past, the Palestinian Mandate, and some other elements, do you think that UK's recognition carries a special significance today, perhaps more than that of any other European nation?
The short answer, I'm afraid, is no, I don't. I think that the move today, as you say, is largely symbolic. It's political. I think under any sensible definition or agreed definition of statehood, there is no state of Palestine right now. That's not me expressing opinion whether there should be, but there isn't. So the statement today was purely political and symbolic, but I don't think the origins of that have anything to do with a sense of duty from the past. Whatever the script may have said, I think the British move today relates to the moves from Canada, Australia, Portugal, France, and many, many other places, where countries that still have an unwavering support for Israel's right to exist and to defend itself are increasingly uncomfortable with events that they see, actions that they see, and want to put some pressure on Israel, and thereby actually a little bit of pressure on the USA also, in an attempt to try and disrupt, not to remove Israel's right to defend itself at all, but an attempt to disrupt some of the suffering. And as I think perhaps you might have said, that the chances of a two-state solution are certainly very, very faint.
Indeed.
But a two-state solution would appear to be the only hope that we have for peace. So that's what I see this government doing. It's trying to express and revive hope for peace via a two-state solution. And it's part of a global trend rather than British guilt or remorse from the distant past.
I see. Thank you very much indeed. And Ken, my question to you, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been highly critical of this decision, naturally, and his ministers, including Smotrich, fiercely criticized this decision. But if, as he says, as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says, nothing changes on the ground and the creation of a Palestinian state is unlikely in practice, why oppose it so strongly? After all, Palestinians, everybody would agree, that deserve some form of statehood there in that territory, but that's probably not the right time for their recognition. But many people argue that symbolically it is still vital. But we're not talking about that. I'm talking about the vehement Israeli denunciation of what Britain and others did. Is this opposition about principle, about politics, or about the practical implications for Israel at this juncture, you think?
There are still 48 hostages in the dungeons and the tunnels in Gaza. And now everybody started recognizing a Palestinian state. It's not about a Palestinian state. Hamas is not interested in a Palestinian state. They're only interested in themselves and the destruction of the state of Israel. It's a religious fight. It's not a territorial fight. So this move from Britain, particularly, is rather fashionable. It's rather fashionable nowadays to take a stance for the Palestinians on the universities, and especially at the leftist parties, the woke and the left. And it is opportunistic and also hypocritical, because, you know, the British in the past have offered the Palestinians 3 times in a row to have a state of their own. And the Palestinians have always refused. The Israelis have been offering the Palestinians several times the opportunity to grant them a state, and they have refused. So why would they take the opportunity for a Palestinian state while the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, and all the other factions have never showed any interest in having a Palestinian state? So this whole move from the Western world, and the British in particular, is rather hypocritical. And for Netanyahu, of course, this is a principle, that they are fighting terrorism. You know, what happened on the 7th of October was a pogrom. They were attacked by Hamas. And they're not simply defending themselves against Hamas. They're defending themselves against Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, Iran, what happened, and against factions in Syria and Iraq. You know, they're fighting a war on 7 fronts, uprising terrorism on the West Bank. I mean, it's all over the place. And Israel is defending themselves. They're winning the war at the end, and they're putting this fire out. And now the Western world, especially the Western allies of the past, have become their enemies. It is just unbelievable.
I mean, all of those countries, UK, France, Australia, New Zealand, I mean, of course, more importantly, UK and France, supported Israel over the past few decades. And the question is, why now? What happened? Maybe it's related to what Israel did on the ground in Gaza and many other parts of that territory. Andy, to what extent there is actually, in fact, reasonably consolidated view in the UK about the necessity of recognizing the state of Palestine? We know that there is some public support, as recent polls suggest, but the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, has been reported as fiercely critical of this decision. I mean, I want to ask you a very basic question. Had the Conservatives been in power in 2025, had Boris Johnson, one of the Tory leaders, been in power in 2025, do you think Britain would still have taken the step of recognizing Palestine at this juncture?
That's a really good question, and I'm going to estimate that he would certainly be less likely to. Whether he would have done, I do not know. I mean, as I say, I keep stressing, although we're talking about Britain, and I'm totally comfortable doing that, the context here is an international movement of this kind. This isn't Britain acting alone. This is Britain actually slightly behind the curve. Britain remains a very strong ally of Israel, but being an ally of someone doesn't mean that you will never, ever criticise or try and point out issues. I think that Boris Johnson, so let's talk about Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer has issues within his own party, as Ken pointed out, on the left, on the woke, if you want to use that word, there is more sympathy for Palestine, there is a pro-Palestine lobby, and in the ruling Labour Party there is a small but strong voice to that effect. And Keir Starmer does feel, our Prime Minister does feel the pressure from that, but you know what? He's felt the pressure from that for a long time. And I think what's moved him is not the growing voice in Britain. It's the changes in the action. It's the seeing of people in absolute desperation or new levels of desperation in Gaza. I stress again that I know that Keir Starmer has unwavering support for the state of Israel and unwavering support for the state of Israel to defend its borders. But none of us can watch and see what we see on TV and not feel the need to try to do something. And I think that's what the world is doing here. The world is trying to disrupt and trying to do something. And it's not a show of support for Hamas or whatever Hamas might say. It really isn't. And it's not a snub for Israel, whatever Netanyahu might think. I'm reading into it that is an attempt to disrupt, to try and see if we can get back on the table the idea of a two-state solution. I know Netanyahu hates the idea, but a two-state solution is the only way that peace can ever happen. It's not a British issue, it's an international issue. But you mentioned the polls earlier, and they are growing. The support for a two-state solution and support for recognition of the state of Israel is growing. The questions asked around the world by pollsters do vary, so we have to be wary of the data. But there's undoubtedly a movement of public opinion. And you know, when the hideous events that Hamas committed almost 2 years ago happened, the show of support within Britain and Europe for Israel was so strong and so solid, and now it remains strong. But people are starting to have doubts about the way things are being conducted. And I think Israel could lose some ground PR-wise. I know that in the USA, the public is starting to become uncomfortable. People who were previously undecided are starting to support the idea of a two-state solution. So I think that the USA's unflinching support of Israel, just as the UK's was, I don't think Israel can rely on that forever.
Yes, and we'll come to that point a bit later. Just to follow the line of reasoning offered by Andy, Ken, Israel's opposition leader, Mr. Golan, has described the UK's recognition as a grave political failure for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and for his allies, blaming what the leader of the opposition of Israel called political recklessness and refusal to end the war and a dangerous choice of occupation and annexation. In that light, would you say that Britain's move and moves of other Western countries actually, fundamentally, on the whole, cumulatively, is less about rewarding Hamas, but more a reaction to Netanyahu's Gaza policy?
Yeah, but you cannot rely on political opposition in Israel. You know, the opposition will fight Netanyahu anyhow and anyway. So what's all about is that the Western world has changed position dramatically, and they've lost. They can't recognize their own history anymore. You know, when the Germans started the war, it took us 5 years to defeat them. And 9 million Germans died in that war. All their cities were destroyed. And here we fight Hamas in Gaza. and Hezbollah and the Houthis and all the other ones, entrenched in a very small place where there are 2 million inhabitants, and they use the population as a first line of defense, as a human shield. Well, that's very difficult to fight, and it's very difficult to win. But there's no other choice, because if you're a firefighter, you can't put a fire out for 80%. And so the Israelis have no other option than take out Hamas. And Hamas use their own population, the so-called Gazans Palestinians, and they don't give a damn about them. They only want to survive and to remain in place. And that's why this is such a struggle. We have all had our struggles in the past. The Americans had to fight the Japanese for 4 years in a row, killing 2 million Japanese, and nobody complained about that. We threw 2 atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Nobody complained about that. And now Israel is defending themselves. So a proper support would have been in place. And now we're talking about a Palestinian state. Well, what kind of state are you expecting? In Gaza and in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, they pay for slay. They are infuriating terrorism almost every day. It's happening in Gaza, so there's no borders, there's no government, there's nothing over there.
I know,
So
Ken,
who's
I know
going
that
to
you're not
represent the
an
Palestinians?
admirer of two-state solution. Actually, I remember one of our conversation where you said that West Bank should have been Jordanian, and the Gaza should have been controlled by Egypt. So effectively, what was the case between 1949 and 1967? And I remember, and actually vividly remember your article, which I read with a great deal of enthusiasm. But I just, before moving into the real practicalities of today, I want to ask this particular question, with which I actually started this conversation. It's about Britain-Israel relations, about the sense of duty. Although Andy said that it's not about sense of duty, it's just a wider trend, and UK just behind the curve. But Ken, I just want to ask this question. This has been, just sort of fluctuating in my mind for some considerable time. I fully understand there is a frustration in Israel about the UK's decision, about the decision of other Western countries. But is it not, in truth, rather ungrateful to a certain extent to criticize Britain for recognizing Palestine, when this recognition is, largely symbolic, since no Palestinian state exists in practice, and everybody realizes that Hamas is not to be allowed to govern, Gaza, it's a terrorist organization. But after all, bearing in mind Britain's role, as midwife, central to the creation of Israel, the Balfour Declaration, the mandate years to the 1947 partition plan, is it not too much to expect Britain to give everything to Israel and the Western world in its full totality to Israel, and nothing to the Palestinians, when it was Britain that enabled Jewish immigration and ultimately the state of Israel in many ways?
Well, the Britons offered the Palestinians in 1948 their own state. There was a two-state solution on the table in 1948. The Arabs walked away, they lost their morality and started a war. They lost. They did it again in 1967, and they did it again in 1974. So the Israelis have tried through the Oslo Accords to build, to work on the two-state solution. So the Oslo Accords, they went down the drain in 2010 in Camp David. Several other prime ministers in Israel have tried, even till 2008, offering Mahmoud Abbas a Palestinian state. He did not even respond to the offer. They walked away from it because they don't want a Palestinian state. They want one state and no Israel. Destroy Israel and remove the Jews. And the whole propaganda is built around that idea. So who are you going to talk to? You can't negotiate with people that come to the table to kill you. That's what Golda Meir said, and she's absolutely right. Nothing has changed in all these years. And then we saw the pogrom on the 7th of October, which has been the worst pogrom since years, since the Second World War. And now we're fighting on 7 fronts to defend ourselves, because this whole idea was invented in Tehran. The Iranians, they use Hamas and Hezbollah as proxy armies to destroy the state of Israel. This is not a territorial fight, it's a religious fight. That's what's going on. And nobody recognizes it because everybody's talking about Palestine, recognizing Palestine. Palestine does not even exist.
Well, Palestine was not allowed to exist in the first place. But Andy, it looks like there is a considerable body of opinion inside Israel dominating the landscape there, in line with which, Palestinians should not have their own state. They should not be allowed to have a state because they don't have agency. I mean, I want to sort of connect this conversation with Britain's historic role, which you think is not central to the debate now, but I fully understand that. But do you think that Israelis are sort of slightly ungrateful towards the Western partners, which have supported them all along the way? It's just now, after what happened in Gaza, they're simply demanding a bit of caution, a bit of sense of measure and proportion. This is in particular in the context of the fact that some people believe that State of Israel would not have existed without that fundamental, central, inceptional British role at the beginning. What do you make of this debate?
I think what's the difficulty is we're talking about Israel and the view of Israelis like there is like one body of opinion, and of course there isn't. We talked about Netanyahu and then the leader of the opposition. As Ken's pointed out, the leader of opposition will nearly always disagree and decry whatever Netanyahu or anyone who is in power says. But I think that it shows us that we mustn't assume there is one body of opinion about a two-state solution or about the concept of a Palestinian state within Israel. There'll be a rainbow of opinions. I think that regards the perception of Britain, do I think that Israelis generally are grateful to Britain for the role that it played, rightly or wrongly, in moves that led to the formation of the State of Israel? No, I don't. I think that people get on with their lives. They probably know a tiny bit about the history, and they actually don't really care too much how their state came about, and they certainly won't feel indebted to, I don't know, my great-great-grandparents or someone 108 years ago. So I don't actually think that Israel has anything to be grateful to Britain for actions of 108 and 78, 9 years ago. I do think that Israel should be and is appreciative broadly of support that Britain has shown for its right to exist and its right to defend itself. And while I understand the frustration, the anger of some Israelis, because Britain's statement here is meaningful, whatever we say, although it is just political and symbolic, it does carry weight. And that's why Netanyahu and some others are lashing out.
Gentlemen,
Sorry.
I'm just being informed that President Emmanuel Macron is currently delivering a very important speech in New York City, and Mahmoud Abbas joined him online, and now we will be able to listen to that very speech, which is currently being made, as I'm given to understand.
And we're very hopeful that we will be able to forge it. It is a choice we must make. It is our duty. Peace is much more difficult. It demands much more of us than all wars. The time has come.
Merci pour votre attention.
Thank you for your kind attention. I now invite His Royal Highness, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia. He will be speaking on behalf of His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, Crown Prince and Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, Your Excellency, President of the Republic of France, Your Excellency, Secretary General, Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly, distinguished guests, God, peace and blessings be upon you. I have the honor to deliver the statement of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a co-chair of this conference on behalf of His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud, Crown Prince and Prime Minister of the Kingdom. It is my pleasure to convey to you the greetings of His Majesty King Salman bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud, the custodian of the two holy mosques, and his wishes along with the Crown Prince's wishes for the success of this conference. We thank His Excellency President Macron and His Excellency Antonio Guterres for their efforts towards achieving the two-state solution. We thank him also for recognizing the state of Palestine. This conference is convened under the joint and co-chaired by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and France. At a time when the Israeli occupation authorities continues their aggression and their brutal crimes against our brothers, the Palestinians in Gaza Strip, and its violations in the West Bank and Al-Quds al-Sharif, and its repeated attacks on the sovereignty of Arab and Muslim countries, the latest of which was the attack against Qatar. This underlines the insistence of Israel to continue with its aggressive practices that threaten regional and international peace and stability and undermine efforts of peace in the region. This reiterates our deeply rooted conviction that the implementation of the two-state solution is the only way to achieve just and permanent peace. The historic position of His Excellency, the French President, to recognize the state of Palestine, and the fact that many countries have taken the similar courageous position, and the broad support for the resolution of the General Assembly to adopt the declaration, the New York Declaration on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution that received 142 votes in its favor reflects the will of the international community to render justice to the Palestinian people and consolidate their legal, historic right in line with international frameworks, relevant UN resolutions, and the Arab Peace Initiative. The Kingdom is keen on continuing its partnership with France and all countries calling for peace to follow up on the implementation of the outcomes of this conference, to put an end to the war in Gaza and stop all unilateral measures that threaten Palestinian sovereignty, to work on ending the conflict in the region and establish a Palestinian independent state on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. In conclusion, we thank again those countries that have recognized or have announced their intention to recognize the state of Palestine. We call all other countries to take a similar historic step that will have a great impact on supporting the efforts towards the implementation of the two-state solution, achieve permanent and comprehensive peace in the Middle East, and find a new reality whereby the region can enjoy peace, stability, and prosperity. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman Abdulaziz Al Saud. I now invite His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations Organization, to issue a statement.
Distinguished co-chairs, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the Government of France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for convening this international conference on implementing the two-state solution. I also want to acknowledge the Palestinian delegation and once again note my disappointment that they were denied the opportunity to be fully represented. Excellencies, let's have no illusions. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has gone unresolved for generations. Dialogue has faltered, Resolutions have been flouted. International law has been breached. Decades of diplomacy have come up short. The situation is intolerable and it is deteriorating by the hour. We are here today to help navigate the only way out of this nightmare, a two-state solution, where two independent, sovereign, democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace and security with their secure and recognized borders on the basis of pre-1967 lines, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states, in line with international law, UN resolutions, and other relevant agreements. I welcome the measures many member states are taking to galvanize support for the two-state solution, including the pledges to recognize the state of Palestine. And I welcome the General Assembly's endorsement of the New York Declaration. Excellencies, nothing can justify the horrific 7 October terror attacks by Hamas or the taking of hostages, both of which I have repeatedly condemned. And nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people or any form of ethnic cleansing. The systematic decimation of Gaza, the starvation of the population, the killing of tens of thousands of civilians, most of them women and children, and hundreds of our own humanitarians. I call once again for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and the immediate, full, safe, unconditional, and unhindered humanitarian access. Excellencies, nothing can also excuse developments in the West Bank that pose an existential threat to a two-state solution. The relentless expansion of settlements, the creeping threat of annexation, the intensification of settler violence, all of it must stop. The situation is morally, legally, and politically intolerable. We must recommit ourselves to the two-state solution before it is too late. A solution in which two independent, contiguous, democratic, viable, and sovereign states are mutually recognized and fully integrated into the international community. Excellencies, those who stand in the way are obligated to answer a fundamental question. What is the alternative? A one-state scenario where Palestinians are denied basic rights, expelled from their homes and their land, forced to live under perpetual occupation, discrimination, and subjugation? How is this possible in the 21st century? How is it acceptable? This is neither peace nor justice. It will only increase the growing isolation of Israel on the global stage. And let's be clear, statehood for the Palestinians is a right, not a reward. And denying statehood would be a gift to extremists everywhere. Without two states, there will be no peace in the Middle East, and radicalism will spread around.
For irreversible progress to put an end to the illegal occupation and to make good on our state solution. All of this is fully in line with adherence to international law. It has been approved by the General Assembly and supported by the international community. It is the only credible path towards a just and lasting peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and the only credible path towards peace and security throughout the Middle East as a whole. This will demand difficult decisions be taken. To do everything in your power to allow the two state solution to prevail. This for the peoples of Israel, Palestine, and for humankind as a whole. I thank you.
Je remercie
I thank the Secretary General of the United Nations Organization. I now invite Her Excellency Annalena Baerbock, President of the General Assembly, to make a statement.
Your Excellency President Emmanuel Macron, Your Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Your Highness Prince Faisal bin Farhan, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies. Taking over the presidency of the General Assembly, I received many letters. One moved me deeply. Attached to it were drawings by 3 Palestinian children, Remas, Enas, and Retal. The images were heartbreaking. One showed a school before and after, beneath a bright sun and a blue, clear sky. In the first, the school with open doors and happiness. In the second, their school lies in rubble. A lone boy stands on the debris of what must be once have been his safe place. Perhaps he had a favorite class, a favorite teacher, like our children, a best friend he played with there. Now, all of it is gone. All of the laughter of the children blown away. At that age, children should not be drawing pictures of war. Children should be learning mathematics. They should be playing with friends and scratch dragons or castles, not death and destruction. Yet, for the children of Gaza, this is their reality. Their horror lasted and lasts for over 700 days. Tens of thousands have lost their lives. Tens of thousands of dreams which never will come true. So many killed without the world even learning their names. Until we heard one voice so loud we could not overhear it. The voice of Hind Rajab, captured in a phone call with a red crescent while shelling rained down. After the car she was in was attacked, over and over again, killing her aunt, uncle, and 3 of her cousins next to her. She called over and over again, "I'm so scared, please come." The rescuers tried to calm her as they tried to reach her. They could not. Hind was killed before help arrived. The world failed her. As the world has also failed Kfir Bas and his brother Ayel. Kfir was just 9 months old, the youngest child abducted by Hamas on October 7th, taken with his 4-year-old brother Ayel and their mother. Both were killed in Gaza by terrorists. The world will remember their names as symbols of innocent childhood stolen by terror. I've met with the families of the hostages, fathers, mothers, siblings, aunts, grandparents, still waiting for their loved ones to come home. from wherever Hamas is holding them after more than 700 days. I've also met with Palestinian families, fathers, mothers, siblings, aunts, and grandparents, whose loved ones are buried in the ruins of Gaza. Their message is always the same: we want peace. Or, as one Israeli mother told me, it does not bring my child back if a Palestinian mother loses her child in Gaza. Humanity is not about choosing sides. It's about recognizing that every life matters the same. A life is a life. A Palestinian girl's life is a life. An Israeli boy's life is a life. All the children of the Middle East deserve to grow up knowing only the sun shining on their schools, the laughter of their friends in the playground, and the joy of a meal shared with their families. Not the horrors of starvation, not the horrors of war and terror. Excellencies, the General Assembly has been very clear. We need an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza now. Israel must immediately facilitate the full, rapid, safe, and unhindered entry and delivery of humanitarian assistance to all Palestinian civilians. Hamas must immediately and unconditionally release all remaining hostages. But the horrors of Gaza make equally clear that we cannot allow such devastation to happen again. While the situation in Gaza is unacceptable, settlement expansions and demolitions in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, are eroding any prospects for a political solution. The decade-long Israeli-Palestinian conflict cannot be resolved by endless war, permanent occupation, and recurrent terror. The only way to ensure that future generations of both Palestinians and Israelis can live in peace, security, and dignity is the two-state solution. As the Secretary General said, it's a right, not a reward, to live in your own state, as all humans around the world. We know that some think this is naive. The first resolution on this matter is almost as old as this organization. 78 years ago, the General Assembly adopted Resolution 181, laying the foundation for two states, knowing it's the only way for peace. And to those of you who argue now, but we have tried for decades and failed over and over again, there can be only one answer. If we would stop aiming for what is right because we have not succeeded yet, then evil would prevail. That would be the end of this institution. This institution which promised to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. It would erode the UN's foundational mission to achieve peace, justice, and equal rights for both Israelis and Palestinians. Excellencies, that is why today's conference and the New York Declaration are so crucial. The message we are sending today is no, we are not giving up. The international community does not only remain committed to the two-state solution, we are also identifying tangible, time-bound, and irreversible steps for its realization. And we are willing to take decisive measures and provide international guarantees. Of course, this conference and the New York Declaration will face criticism. Some will say a piece of paper cannot change realities on the ground for Palestinians. Others will dismiss the vision of two states outright. But the fact remains. The New York Declaration was endorsed by 142 member states. And this majority clearly says the war in Gaza must end now. It condemns the attacks committed by Hamas against civilians on 7th of October. It condemns the attacks by Israel against civilians and civilian infrastructure in Gaza. It calls on Hamas to end its rule in Gaza and hand over its weapons. A sovereign and viable state of Palestine needs to be established, living side by side with the state of Israel in peace and security, with mutually recognized borders and full regional integration. Excellencies, the call for peace and the two-state solution is not an abstract. Not for the children watching missiles destroy their school. Not for the families waiting for news that their sons and daughters might be released from captivity. Not for the UN staff in Gaza who have witnessed their colleagues shot. Not for those who have been injured or maimed and will have to live with the trauma of this conflict for the rest of their life. It's an aspiration, but it's also an obligation. We owe it to the memory of Fint, Queer and Ariel and the many, many others. And we owe it to the children like Rimas, Enas and Rital, and all the children of Palestine and all the children of Israel, hoping for a better tomorrow, so that they may not inherit rubble, grief and despair, but safety, dignity and hope, to live one day in peace, side by side.
Je remercie Madame.
I thank the President of the General Assembly. I now invite His Excellency Mahmoud Abbas, President of the State of Palestine, to deliver a statement via video conference.
Thank you. Your Excellency, President Emmanuel Macron, Your Royal Highness, Prince Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud, Your Highness Prince Saud Faisal bin Farhan, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished leaders and heads of delegations, peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. On behalf of the State of Palestine, I would like to express my deepest appreciation for the co-presidency, the United Nations, and all participating states for the historic New York Declaration that was issued during July's conference and adopted by the General Assembly by an overwhelming majority. It marked the beginning of an irreversible path towards ending the humanitarian catastrophe and ending occupation pursuant to international legitimacy and the Arab Peace Initiative. The embodiment of an independent state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital, living side by side with Israel in peace, security, and good neighborliness. The declaration stressed that the war against our people must come to an immediate and durable end. It noted that the crimes emanating from the siege, the starvation and destruction cannot be a means of achieving security. Therefore, we call for a permanent ceasefire. We need to ensure humanitarian access through the United Nations and UNRWA. We need to guarantee the release of hostages, all hostages and prisoners, with the withdrawal of the occupation forces from Gaza. We need a start without delay of Gaza and the West Bank reconstruction through the Cairo International Conference. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to commend the Egyptian-Qatari-US mediation that tries to put an end to this war. We also commend the positions of Egypt and Jordan, who reject the displacement of Palestinians, a matter rejected by the international community as well. The State of Palestine is the only entity eligible to assume full responsibility for governance and security in Gaza. This comes through an interim administrative committee affiliated to the Palestinian government in the West Bank, with Arab and international support and participation. Hamas will have no role in governing. Hamas and other factions must surrender their weapons to the Palestinian Authority. What we want is one unified state without weapons, a state with one law and one legitimate security forces. We stress our condemnation of the occupation's crimes. We also condemn the killing and detention of civilians, including Hamas's actions on October the 7th, 2023. On the other hand, we call for an end to the settlements, the annexation, settlers' terrorism, and the attacks against Islamic and Christian holy sites. We condemn the occupation policies that isolate Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and expand construction on Area E1. We condemn the narrative, the Israeli narrative on Greater Israel, which flouts international law. It represents a direct threat to Arab national security and international peace. This comes in addition to the brutal aggression against the sovereignty of the brotherly state of Qatar and other Arab countries. This necessitates a firm, deterrent international stance. Ladies and gentlemen, the State of Palestine continues to adopt a comprehensive reform agenda promoting governance, transparency, the rule of law, and the reform of the financial system. It also works on the reform of educational curriculum in line with the UNESCO standards, and this will be achieved within 2 years. We're establishing a unified social welfare system after the abolition of all previous payments to the families of prisoners and martyrs. This system is currently undergoing international audit by a specialized international firm. We underline our commitment to organize presidential and parliamentary elections after the end of the war, and within 1 year. We will draft an interim constitution within 3 months to ensure the transfer of power from the authority to the state. This will ensure that no party or individual will participate unless they adhere to the political program and the international commitments of the Palestine Liberation Organization and the rules of international legitimacy. The elections will be held under international observance. Ladies and gentlemen, we desire a modern democratic state based on the rule of law, pluralism, power sharing, equality, justice, and the empowerment of women and youth. We commend the positions of those countries that recognized the State of Palestine. We call on those who have not yet done so to follow suit. We call for your support so that Palestine become a full-fledged member of the United Nations. we have already recognized the right of Israel to existence in 1988 and in 1993, and we still recognize the State of Israel. In this vein, I would like to thank France, Britain, Canada, Australia, and Belgium, in addition to Portugal, Luxembourg, San Marino, and Andorra, and other countries that have been mentioned by His Excellency, the President of France. And we recall with appreciation all 149 countries who have already recognized the State of Palestine earlier. They have participated in our long struggle, the last of which was Spain, Ireland, Norway, Slovenia, and Armenia. We would also like to commend the important role of the presidency of this conference, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and France, as well as Britain, in galvanizing more international recognition. We'd also like to thank all participating countries in this conference for their important role, issuing the New York Declaration and taking irreversible steps to bring about durable peace based on the two-state solution and based on international legitimacy. We would also like to commend the role of the brotherly and friendly countries that support our Palestinian cause in the international fora. We would like to commend, in particular, the role of Algeria, which is assuming the Arab seat in the Security Council. We commend the positions of the peoples and organizations that support the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people to freedom, independence, and statehood. We reject any confusion, I repeat, any confusion between the solidarity with the Palestinian cause and the issue of anti-Semitism. We reject the latter, proceeding from our values and principles. We would also like to express our readiness to work with the US President Donald Trump, with Saudi Arabia, France, and the United Nations and all partners to implement the peace plan adopted during this conference within a specific timetable with international guarantees and monitoring. This would open the gates towards a just peace and comprehensive regional cooperation. In this regard, I call upon Israel to immediately sit on the negotiating table, to put an end to this bloodshed and bring about just and comprehensive peace. And I address the Israeli people saying, our future and yours banks on peace. Enough violence and war. Our generations deserve to enjoy freedom and security. Let the people in our region live in durable peace and good neighborliness. And I would like to seize this opportunity to address all the Jews in the world, wishing them a good new year. And to our patient Palestinian people in their homeland and everywhere, I would like to tell you that the dawn of freedom and liberty is coming, no doubt. That day, ladies and gentlemen, is the day of the State of Palestine and the start of the peace process in the Middle East. We hope that we will call very soon to an international conference that will bring about this matter. Peace and blessings of God be upon you.
Je remercie le président.
I thank the President of the State of Palestine. Excellencies, distinguished representatives, before suspending the formal proceedings of the conference, we would ask you to kindly remain seated for the next part of this afternoon's programme. This meeting is suspended.
Nous allons à présent
We will now listen to statements made by heads of state and government, including by the co-chairs of the working groups. They will present tangible efforts made to implement the New York Declaration. I remind you that this Assembly endorsed the New York Declaration by a vast majority to the tune of 142 votes. We remind delegations that statements are limited to 5 minutes for heads of state and government, and those by ministers should be limited to 3 minutes. Microphones will be cut off automatically after these time limits have been exceeded. I now give the floor to the King of Jordan, Your Majesty.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Friends, I thank France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for convening this meeting. We meet here at the UN, where every country, every people are promised a voice. We meet to raise our voices for peace and for justice, for the only path to ensuring security for the Middle East and beyond, the two-state solution. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. Almost every year since, our countries have met within these halls to decry the injustice and violence of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and seek solutions. And now, for nearly 2 years, we have been witnesses to a horrific level of bloodshed and destruction in Gaza. It stands in flagrant violations of international laws and the values of our shared humanity, and it threatens the foundations of future peace. The war in Gaza must end. Humanitarian aid must flow unhindered, and all illegal and unilateral measures in the West Bank and settler violence must also end. A clear choice stands before us. On one side, to continue down the dark and bloody path of war and conflict, or to take the path of peace through the two-state solution. And today the world is taking a significant step on the path to achieving just and lasting peace. This global rally behind the two-state solution sends a clear message. The conflict must end. The two-state solution is the only path to the just and lasting peace that fulfills the rights of all our peoples. We thank all countries that have recognized the state of Palestine, and now we must work to stop all measures that undermine the two-state solution. We must make sure that today is a step in a continued effort to realize it. As we work on ending the war in Gaza, we must also do all we can to restore hope. The commitment so many countries are making to a future of peace today begins that long, difficult, but essential process. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank His Majesty the King of Jordan. I now give the floor to the President of Turkey.
Sayın Devlet
Excellencies, heads of state and government, His Excellency the Secretary General, esteemed delegation members, let me greet you all with most heartfelt feelings and with kind regards. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to France and to Saudi Arabia, who are co-chairing this conference. I congratulate all the countries that have decided to recognize the state of Palestine for honoring the voice of justice and of conscience. I hope that this step, along with the initiatives to be undertaken in the coming period, will accelerate the implementation of a two-state solution. In our region, an unprecedented catastrophe has been unfolding for nearly 2 years now under the Israeli government's heavy and inhumane attacks. The massacre and brutality in Gaza continues with all its intensity. Since it is true that anyone who has a conscience cannot possibly accept this or remain silent vis-à-vis all this, the Netanyahu government is trying to make sure the following. Their goal is to make the establishment of a Palestinian state impossible and to force the Palestinian people to emigrate as much as possible. In the midst of these negative developments of a group of countries, among them members of the UN Security Council, they have taken the decision to recognize the state of Palestine, and this is an extremely significant and historic step. Now, we wholeheartedly wish we could see Palestinian President Mr. Abbas to be able to speak in this conference here today. Nevertheless, I find it extremely valuable that all the participants speaking today are also serving as the voice of the Palestinian people. It is also a fact that today the Palestinian cause has become a global issue. The participation in this hall today is the most important proof of this. In Europe, in Asia, the Americas, and Africa, we are witnessing people chanting "Free Palestine" on the streets, on social media, or in the press more than ever before now. This contradiction should not escape anyone's attention, including my friends here. The Netanyahu government governs today a society who, in the past, was targeted for eradication with the persecutions of the Holocaust. And today, his government is committing genocide against its own neighbors with whom they have shared the same land, the same water, air, and sea for thousands of years. Standing up against this oppression is not only a legal duty of the international community, but also a moral responsibility. The international community must stop expansionism in the West Bank, also the fait accompli in East Jerusalem, and the attempts to spread instability in the region. Otherwise, we cannot possibly talk about the presence of an international order or talk about defending universal values. The goal of deepening occupation and annexation policies is clear. The goal is to kill the vision of a two-state solution, to leave no ground for the state of Palestine to survive, to exile the Palestinian people, and to implement their expansionist ambitions by fueling instability in the region. Now, this cannot be allowed. At this conference today, I hope that the countries that have shown the courage to recognize the state of Palestine will follow through on this historic stance with determined, concrete, and deterrent steps. It is now necessary to declare a ceasefire, ensure unhindered access to humanitarian aid to Gaza, and for Israel to withdraw its forces from Gaza. Apologies. I cannot hear the president. I lost his voice. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. This is the interpreter speaking. I cannot hear the president. His voice is gone. His voice is gone. We cannot hear him. Me and my colleague, we cannot hear the president. Apologies for this, but we're having a technical glitch here. We cannot hear the president. We stopped being able to hear him. His voice is gone completely. Sorry, but we cannot hear the president. His voice is gone completely. We stopped being able to hear him. And right next to our booth, we have colleagues from, we believe, the Brazilian delegation, the Portuguese booth, and I can see them from the window. They cannot hear the floor either. We cannot hear the floor. We cannot hear the floor. Oh, it's back.
Au président du Brésil.
I give the floor now to the President of Brazil.
I would like to commend President Emmanuel Macron and Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman for leading this important process and event. The question of Palestine arose when the General Assembly adopted the so-called Partition Plan 78 years ago. The session in which it was approved was chaired by Brazilian Osvaldo Aranha. On that occasion, the two-state perspective was born, but only one materialized. The conflict between Israel and Palestine is the paramount symbol of the obstacles faced by multilateralism. It shows how the tyranny of the veto sabotages the very reason for the UN's existence, of avoiding atrocities like the ones that motivated its founding from happening again. It also goes against its universal vocation, blocking the admission as a full member of a state whose creation derives from the authority of the General Assembly itself. A state is based on three pillars: territory, population, and government. All have been systematically undermined in the Palestinian case. How can we talk about territory in the face of an illegal occupation that grows with each new settlement? How do you keep a population in the face of the ethnic cleansing we are witnessing in real time? And how do you build a government without empowering the Palestinian Authority? As the Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territories pointed out, there is no more appropriate word to describe what is happening in Gaza than genocide. Therefore, Brazil decided to become a party to the case submitted by South Africa to the International Court of Justice. The terrorist acts committed by Hamas are unacceptable. Brazil was emphatic in condemning them. But the right to defense does not authorize the indiscriminate killing of civilians. Nothing justifies taking the lives or mutilating more than 50,000 children. Nothing justifies destroying 90% of Palestinian homes. Nothing justifies using hunger as a weapon of war, nor targeting starving people seeking help. 500,000 Palestinians do not have enough food, more than the population of Miami or Tel Aviv. Hunger does not afflict the body only, it shatters the soul. What is happening in Gaza is not only the extermination of the Palestinian people, but an attempt to annihilate their dream of a nation. Both Israel and Palestine have the right to exist. Working to achieve a Palestinian state means correcting an asymmetry that compromises dialogue and obstructs peace. We salute the countries that recognize Palestine, as Brazil did in 2010. We are already the vast majority of the 193 members of the UN. Brazil commits to strengthening controls on imports from illegal settlements in the West Bank and maintaining a suspension of exports of defense materials, including dual-use materials that could be used in crimes against humanity and genocide. Given the Security Council's failure to act, the General Assembly must exercise its responsibility. We support the creation of a body inspired by the Special Committee Against Apartheid, which played a central role in ending the South African racial segregation regime. Securing Palestine's right to self-determination is an act of justice and an essential step toward restoring the strength of multilateralism and recovering our collective sense of humanity. Thank you very much.
Je remercie.
I thank the President of Brazil. I now give the floor to the President of Portugal.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We have just heard from a number of important statesmen, heads of government, heads of state, as part of their remarks delivered in the context of the conference on the implementation of two-state solution convened and co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. We heard from the President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who strongly supported the idea of two-state solution. We heard from the President of Brazil, from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, and also from the current incumbent President of UN General Assembly, the President of the 80th session of UN General Assembly, Ms. Baerbock. And our guests, Andy Preston and Kelman Lerland, have been faithfully waiting all of those minutes. And gentlemen, back, thank you very much indeed for waiting all that time. I'm so grateful to you, and I'm really very grateful to you. Ken, Israel has got many friends around the world, really. Amongst those 142 countries that endorsed that New York Declaration, there are many countries that strongly, vehemently, unquestionably support the state of Israel, its right to defend itself, and they are very clear about Hamas and its nature and so forth. Do you think, Ken, bearing in mind all of those realities and what we just heard from a number of important statesmen, global leaders, Israel now finds itself facing a level of unprecedented diplomatic isolation it hasn't experienced before, with more than 150 countries recognizing Palestine, even close Western allies, including the United Kingdom and France, signaling clear sign of frustration. How do you think Israel should see itself in this moment, from being a state once defined by the fight for survival, which many people respect around the world, and the memory of that happened is still there, of course, to now being accused in some quarters of grave misconduct? What sort of self-reflection do you think it will trigger within Israel?
I think the Israelis will see this as a theater that's going on already for a long time. And history repeats itself. And I think if you go back to the Jewish history, we've seen so many tragedies in Jewish history, and this will add to it. I think that from a geopolitical point of view, yes, the Israelis are isolated by what's currently going on in the theater in New York, with a biased UN, and so many countries having their own particular reason to take this stance. But the boots on the ground will show what's going to happen in the next coming weeks and months, and nobody's going to change that. It's for Israel a very difficult position, but they are the 51st state of the United States, and the United States is supporting them. And I think that the Israelis will take the decision to better walk alone, although that is a very, very difficult situation currently.
Andy, what do you make of that? Those statements that we heard from a UN Secretary General, from President of the current Assembly, from President of Turkey. What is your sense of what is happening? Is it really theater, as Ken is claiming, or is it really something like a turning point in history?
I think Ken is mainly right, because its value is symbolic, and there was nothing that was said that was particularly surprising. I don't think. However, I do think that the pressure is starting to build. I mean, look, if we look in Europe now, the countries that are holding firm, we've got the bigger nations of Germany and Italy holding firm and not joining this group that is using the symbolism of acknowledging a Palestinian state. And we could debate the value of that, but it has a symbolic value, and it clearly annoys Netanyahu and other people. And Germany and Italy could fall in line. If they do, I mean, the unthinkable is always possible. If we think about Trump for a minute, Trump has managed somehow to bully most of the world with tariffs. Instead of standing firm together, Canada, Australia, UK, Japan, instead of standing firm as a strong trading bloc with strong defence against Trump and saying, we're not having your tariffs, we are going to fight you back, fight fire with fire, I'm convinced Trump would have backed down, but somehow they didn't dare stand up to him. This joining together over this completely unrelated issue may well just show people in Europe and elsewhere that they can band together and work together for what they perceive to be a greater good. And I think Trump has shown that he will always back down to strength. Trump always backs down to strength, to everyone who is strong and stands up to him. And I think there is a small chance that if Germany joins the fold and then Italy does, that Europe actually finds a voice and works that they can work together and stand up to something that they all feel deeply. And I think if Trump feels trade pressure, all bets are off as to the USA's undenying and unquestioning support for Israel. That doesn't mean they wouldn't be a friend. Britain is still a friend of Israel. Britain is a close friend of Israel, but that doesn't mean it will support everything it does at all times. And I think the USA's position could change if Germany falls into line, if Italy falls into line, and Europe rises up and stands firm against Trump, and trade deals suddenly look questionable.
Andy, just follow-up question, exactly related to the gist of your own articulation. You already said that Britain is behind the curve, but this recognition of Britain and other countries, they cumulatively carry historic weight. But we are in 2025, not in 1917. UK is no longer as decisive as it was once. Without shift in Washington's position, Israel will not probably feel compelled to change course, as you yourself mentioned. But you mentioned about Germany and Italy. You think that unthinkable is not outside the realm of possibility. Is it still fundamentally the case that US support is a linchpin for Israel's policy, that it can hold on for years so long as America stands behind it? And one very fundamental question, is there a danger for Israel in relying so heavily on a single ally, however important?
I think that what we mustn't do is assume that every person in Israel or even the vast majority or the significant majority of people in Israel support Netanyahu's action and don't find it deeply disturbing, some of the scenes that they see. Be wrong of us to think that all of Israel backs Netanyahu. They don't. They're in a war zone. They feel under threat. The Israeli psychology is that they feel threatened by their neighbors. So they are naturally defensive and can lash out. And that's totally understandable and defensible. However, when any nation loses all support from those outside it, the political powers lose support of the people. People do not want to feel isolated. People that are in a war zone or feel in a siege mentality gain strength from support outside, even if it's only psychological support, even if it isn't military or financial support. And the scale of the US and its international influence is so important to Israel. I'm not predicting that goes, but what I'm saying is under Trump, and because Trump is causing mayhem on the international trade scene, it is not unthinkable that if the rest of Europe falls into line and stands up to Trump on trade, that he could start to relent and just water down his support for Israel. And that would have enormous consequences politically for Netanyahu and the Israeli government.
Ken, just to follow the same line of inquiry, is it reasonable for a country, in this particular case for Israel, to rely so completely on a single power, however big and important that power may be, in this case, of course, the United States? Israel today has got many friends, UK, France, they're all friends. They're simply criticizing Israel for what's happening in Gaza. They're saying that as a friend, we have to tell you something which may not be nice to hear from your perspective. But none of those countries claiming to be enemies of Israel. They are still friends of Israel, of course. It's just they say that two-state solution is the only viable option. So today, Israel seems to stand almost alone with Washington as its only sort of indispensable critical ally. Will this reliance, do you think, leave Israel at some point dangerously exposed if US support, as Andy says, not outside the realm of possibility, may one day falter?
It's a bitter reality that we have to face, that our former friends maybe they have not become our enemies, but that's the way the Israeli people and the public media, the public opinion is taking this. The United States is very much important, very important for the Israelis and for Israel as a country. But as we know, politics has always been very opportunistic. And the European Union is definitely not a strong world power anymore. You know, France is going down the drain financially, like so many other countries in Europe. Well, if that's going to happen, then they all go for themselves and they will leave the political agenda. The Israelis, what I've seen is the presentation of Netanyahu last couple of days ago about the Israeli economy. And that's interesting because the country is booming and people have faith. And the Israelis have faith in their own economy and their own survival and existence. So there is a tendency in Israel, we better walk alone. Yes, they rely on the United States, but they are intertwined with each other very, very much. So more than 6 million Jews in the United States, and there's a lot of political power of the Jews in the United States. So we see that this is an opportunistic game. It's a theater that's going on currently. Yes, it's a bitter reality that the Israelis are on themselves and isolated by former friends. But don't forget the Russians, don't forget the Chinese. They're playing a very important role in the world as well. You know, everything could change. And will change in the next coming whatever months, weeks and months. If the Israelis defeat Hamas, and they will defeat them, then we have another situation on the ground. Because the Abraham Accords is the only way out that the Israelis are pursuing. Netanyahu is pursuing the Abraham Accords. And everybody, all the neighbors in the Middle East need peace. Not only the Israelis, the Jordanians, you know, can imagine 75% of the population of Jordan are Palestinians. and they favor Hamas. You know, this king was on the stage over there, but I can tell you, he's shitless about what's currently happening in Gaza or in Syria or in Lebanon. You know, this whole place is ramshackle. So the Saudis, you know, this king of Saudi Arabia. Now, I'm rather cynical about his speech, because King Faisal signed a deal with the former president of the Israelis many years ago about a peace, about an Israeli state, and they all agreed to that. But you know, history took his chance and changed everything. Well, here we are on the brink of whatever is going to happen geopolitically. Everything is about to change. Now it's for the worse. It could be for the better in maybe.
When you say everything is going to change, Ken, just want to get that sense of clarity there. You're saying that if Israel defeats Hamas, if all the hostages are back, will it be the situation in the context of which Palestinian Authority will be given more agency and the state could eventually be established in Gaza and West Bank? Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying that effectively by Israel defeating Hamas, facts on the ground will change to the extent that there will be absolutely no viability for Palestinian state to establish at any point later? So what do you mean by things will change? In what form and shape they will change? It's my last question, and then I will finalize.
My expectation actually is, since we have seen this recognition of the Palestinian state, which is rather hypocritical and opportunistic, that the Israelis will take a very fierce stance and annexing Area C of the West Bank and the Jordan Valley. That would be a confrontation that they will take. I know the Israeli mentality, they will go for the confrontation because they believe in themselves. The only way out is that the Arabs resolve the problem that they caused themselves in 1948 and the years follow on. The Israelis have to defeat Hamas on the ground and bring in Arab peaceful army in order to control Hamas. They have to make a deal with Jordan about the West Bank. They have to make a deal with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and so many other countries to establish a relationship that will bring peace in the Middle East. Because the Palestinians, they have nobody to represent them. Hamas can do it, and the Palestinian Authority is not able to represent the Palestinian people. They're too much divided. There's nobody today that will be able to take ownership and govern a Palestinian state.
Well, one of the propositions one of the propositions made by some Israelis, by former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, whom I interviewed a few months ago, was that there must be an alternative to Hamas, and that alternative could be deemed as an agent of Palestinian people. But there are different ways of looking at it, of course. I'm so grateful to both of you, Andy and Ken. Andy, is there any particular remark you would like to add at the very end? Would you like to add any particular remark at the very end in the context of this conversation?
I would just say, look, I sense that there is a feeling that the UK and other nations are deserting Israel and no longer friends, and I don't think that is the case. I think the UK is a steadfast supporter of Israel's right to exist, a steadfast supporter of the only democracy in the region, and a steadfast supporter of its industry and endeavour and enterprise. But being a friend doesn't mean that you agree on everything, and being a friend sometimes means pointing out things that friends don't want to hear. So, and when I see and others see what is happening in Gaza, we see a pathetic situation. And the origin of the word pathetic is related to pity. We have deep pity, and we want Israel to find and work on a solution that doesn't involve directly the mass suffering of huge numbers of civilians, and to use its intellectual, financial enterprise power to achieve that.
And the President Ken van Leeuwen, I'm very grateful to both of you for your patience, for your very incisive and perceptive answers. Thank you very much again. Most grateful to both of you.
Have a nice evening. Thank you very much.
Well, today's subject matter was, of course, the conference held in New York, convened and co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia, and the fundamental question of the recognition, however symbolic and formal, but recognition of a conjectural Palestinian state and circumstances related to that very central subject. You've been watching a Context Special, and see you very soon indeed.